Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Brian Miner back on the show. It was a fantastic chat. We dig into things such as his current training, some niggles and injuries he's been dealing with, and also when he's stepping back on the bodybuilding stage. We will then delve into some of the changes he's made to his changing over the last years, what's influenced him, a bit about long muscle lengths, biomechanics, and then we dig into the question of, do we need to logbook? Could you grow just fine without logbooking? And some of the nuances and discussion behind that. It was a fantastic chat. As a reminder, at Revive Stronger, we are an online coaching company. That means we help people lose fat, gain muscle, and all that good stuff in between. And if you're interested in either of those goals, or a photo shoot, stepping on stage, or just feeling a bit healthier, then definitely hit us up. That will be linked in the bio as always. But without further ado, let's get into the show. Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Brian Miner back on the show. Episode 279. I actually don't know what episode we're on, but we're in the 300s, and that was a year ago that Brian was on. It's actually pretty much a year ago. So we were talking about kind of metabolic building phases and eating into shows, kind of that reverse diet or that long bodybuilding taper. There's so many different words you could call that phase. I don't know if you have a term you've settled on actually, Brian, for that.
I just eating into a show.
There you go. Eating into shows. That's a great one.
Eat at maintenance for a bit.
Yeah.
Just work your way in maintenance.
For sure. So actually, any competitors listening that are like, oh, that sounds interesting, you haven't listened to it, definitely check that one out because that was a great chat. And but for today, obviously, it's been a year, and whilst I guess I keep tabs on people I'm interested in on social media and stuff. Actually, Brian, you don't share tons on what you're doing, and there was some exciting news. Like, at least from the outside in, the exciting news I wanted to congratulate you on was becoming part of Team 3DMJ. I think a lot of the listeners will know 3DMJ. You guys now were sort of like the online coaching company and business that I looked up to when I was getting into the industry and still do. I saw as kind of leading prime example of how things should be done as coaches. And so I think you fit in perfectly. It didn't come as a surprise to me when I saw that happen. I was like, oh, that just makes sense. I think people wouldn't even be surprised if they felt like you were already part of that team because you were very good friends and obviously thought very similarly in terms of coaching philosophies and everything alike. So yeah, congratulations on that. I know it's a very late congratulations. I probably said it on a post somewhere.
No, I appreciate it. I think you actually messaged me after that happened, but no, it's been great. It was, a good fit. It kind of caught me off guard a little bit. Like I didn't realize they were really looking to expand the coaching. And then when they asked, I was like, yeah, this would be good. And it's been a pretty seamless transition, I think, as well as it could be. And it's obviously, I have the same sentiment as you. It's, a group that I kind of held at the, kind of at the top in terms of coaching teams in the industry. So yeah, it's an honor to be a part of it. And looking forward to continuing to collaborate on things with them. And I appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it just, although I can see that it came as a surprise, when you look at it, at least like a lot of people looking outside in, it definitely made a lot of sense for you. So I'm glad that worked nicely and it's been seamless. And something I was going to ask is actually a lot of the guys, actually Eric's just getting into it and Brad's not doing so much, but a lot of them kind of vlog and share their journey a lot. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you don't do this so much. I don't know if you've had any pressure or suggestions to do it. And it's something I was going to ask about anyway.
No, I feel like they're, I think they realize some of that stuff's not really in my wheelhouse, I guess. I mean, it could be. The next time I prep, I do want to document it.
Cool.
I've never, I don't know if I've just been busy and it's just never been something that I've really, enjoyed, but to be fair, I haven't really given it an honest go either. So, maybe once I start, if I'm getting good feedback on it, it might be something that I continue, but I think it's great that, they share in that process of I mean, because I mean, I watch those videos, and so I know there's an interest in them, and I think it's cool seeing, you know, kind of the ups and downs, and just seeing how, you know, people navigate through something like a contest prep, because there's different phases, as you know, and we've experienced, you know, both physically and mentally. So I think, especially for first time competitors, it's, you know, it's valuable information, and even for, you know, experienced competitors, I think with any prep and process like that, anytime you can pick up, you know, lean on experiences of other people, you know, you can kind of refine your process towards, you know, approaching something like a contest prep, which I think is half the fun, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's, I've always enjoyed watching those, and I don't know if I've just always done it myself as well, like documented. I find it hard to not do that. And I definitely pick up things where you might be following someone and they, like Eric as an example, he's very good about kind of saying kind of best practice and kind of this is what the science says and here's the principle. And then you see him apply it, and how he might apply it maybe even differently to how you'd have applied it, or how it's said somewhere else, or he's a bit different to the average. And it's like, like you take it that step further of like that practical step of learning that bit further. So yeah, I think I definitely would be interested in seeing you document more, but I can also speak to the fact that it can be stressful and it is a lot. And if it isn't you, then I completely understand that, like, why would you do it if you don't need to?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think from obviously the position I'm in, you know, as a coach and somebody that's trying to convey these messages, there's certainly value in it. So yeah, I would like to, and I've said that in the past, but you know, I do want to get better about doing that. You know, probably I don't think I'll ever be like a vlog guy that's, you know, walking around and talking in their phone, but yeah, sharing, you know, I think for me, part of the excitement is like sharing things through a prep, but I also realize like sharing things in the off season, it's like it's less exciting, but I think it's probably equally valuable. So it's something I probably should remind myself of more.
Yeah, I think particularly for vlogs, there's something always to talk about in prep, or at least there's a week gone by or 2 weeks where you're like dramatically leaner now, whereas when you're in off season, it's like, here we go again.
Yeah, like, nothing too exciting. A little bit fatter this week, guys.
Yeah. That's the depressing truth, to be honest. But in that regard, how is your off season going? What's training looking like for you? I'm always interested.
It's going well. You know, it's been a long time, and you know, I've talked about this on, you know, a couple other podcasts before, but you know, that after that 2017 prep, I don't think I was really prepared for what after that was going to feel like. You know, in many ways, like I approached it, the post contest window, more appropriately than I have in the past, but I think I hadn't really considered what it was going to feel like without that goal, you know, something kind of staring me in the face. And I knew at the time, like 2017 was like, I thought that might be my last prep at the time. You know, I thought like, this is like, we had just started a family and, you know, we wanted to have another one. And since then we have, and, you know, they're both getting older. So it's, yeah, I think it's something they could even kind of appreciate now. But, you know, the first couple of years after that, it was, I mean, it was still, you know, I was still training consistently and everything. But it wasn't as enjoyable as it has been, you know, these past couple of years. And, you know, I think I've made a good bit of progress, especially through upper body, back, and delts too. But the one thing that probably on a more sour note is like I've dealt with just one little tweak after another with lower body work. So, you know, I competed in powerlifting in the past, and I do want to do another meet, just because I've never had a prep that really has gone perfect, and I want to. It's like I want to hit what I know I could potentially hit if things went well, at least what I think I could. But it's been in that regard a little bit hard building momentum for that, because, like, I mean, I broke my toe. deadlifting. It was
Oh,
it's
wow.
kind of a freak. It was kind of a, I mean, I don't have a super wide stance, but I was using like straps, and I had like set up with my hands just a little bit off,
Yeah.
and I kind of like at the top, like one side was a little bit just slightly heavier. I mean, I wasn't like a foot over on one side or anything, but I just kind of like the bar sort of like twisted a little bit. And then when I set it down, I kind of moved my toe, moved my foot, but I kind of moved it in the way of the weight because it
Oh,
was
no.
coming in. So I mean, that wasn't a huge setback, but that was one. Like I was planning to do a meet last year in March, and that happened like a couple months out from it, and I think it was more just deflating. Like, you know, I had this momentum. I probably still could have done the meet, um, but yeah, that was one thing. And then I had like, I don't know if it was like a hip labrum issue recently. Like my left hip was bothering me. It like sort of popped at the bottom of a squat, and like I part of when that happened, like my knees were kind of achy, and like I was descending into the squat, and I noticed like if I was super controlled, like my knees would, they could feel it a little bit. So I'm like, okay, you're almost being too controlled. Be a little bit more like controlled, but more assertive on the eccentric. And like I didn't dive bomb the rep or anything, but
Yeah.
yeah, I did. My knees felt better, but then like my hip on the way up. So it's been one thing kind of after another. You know, on the plus side, it's like my legs are probably my strongest body part. So it's um, but like I want, as any competitor wants, like to improve season to season. And I think as a whole I will, but um, you know, I think there's still a little ground that I could probably make up there with lower body the rest of this off season, which I expect to. Like things are feeling better now, so I'm kind of ramping back up. But yeah, that part sucked, but other than that, like it's been great. So
Yeah, I think those a lot of people can listen and understand if they've been doing this like as long as you have. Like I'm guessing decade plus,
mhm.
probably coming to 2 decade,
Yeah,
and no, probably not two.
it's been,
That'll be a
yeah,
while.
it's been, I mean, 16 I started
Okay.
lifting actually before, like seriously lifting at 16. So it's been 22 years. So,
Oh, damn! So over two
yeah,
decades.
yeah, but
Incredible. So, yeah, I mean, and this, I don't know if this is probably an unanswerable question. Would you attribute those niggles more so because of being more interested into powerlifting and invested into the barbell lifts, or do you think they're kind of almost the cost of doing business of just weightlifting for you?
I think some of it is, I don't think it's the powerlifting, to be honest. To be honest, like when I'm like volume is sort of what exacerbates my flare ups more than anything. So, and fortunately, like I've always responded off pretty low amounts of volume for lower body. Um, I think, you know, some of it may be cost of doing business, but I mean, not. I mean, there's athletes that have been training as long as I have that probably feel better in that regard. So that's not entirely it. And I've never really like outside of like two periods of time where, you know, in 2015 when I actually it's like 2013 I ran Smolov for squats. Like that was really the only time I've really like redlined high intensities for a good bit of volume, and you know my knees were fine after that. I think, to be honest, I think a lot of it is playing hockey, and like I still
Oh, right.
play with my buddies, you know, once or twice a week, and I play goalie, and I grew up playing goalie, and I still do. And there's a reason there's not a lot of, you know, guys in their late 30s still doing that, and it's a very like unnatural position, like in terms of like it requires a ton of like internal rotation at the hips,
Right.
um, which you know I probably have a decent amount, but it's like I feel it after I play. I feel it in
Yeah.
my, you know, my hips, my knees, my ankles, and so that definitely doesn't help, but it makes me happy. So I've kind of, you know, figured out, you know, a way to balance it. There's, you know, weeks where, you know, I'm like I can't, like I know when to back off. So it's been that's I think been a contributing factor, which
Yeah.
is tough to admit in a way, because it's like the solution to that could be like, because like I haven't played now and it'll be like a week and a half, and my legs feel significantly better. It's
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, that might be it. At least, the acute things. So, yeah, other than that, like I'm sure it's just a culmination of a lot of things. I mean, I've always tried to be very, cognizant and controlled when I lift and everything. Um, so I don't think it's inevitable for people, but
Yeah.
I think, and it's nothing like so severe that like I just can't train lower body for extended periods of time. It's just not as like with as much intent as maybe I did like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So it's, that part's been tough, but I also think, um, I'm working on different things like on the mobility front for that. It's like you can't go in, you go into a gym and you just get onto the bar. It's like you used to, like I was going to the bar, do a few warm up sets, or just go in like load 135 on and just start warming up, set your gym bag down and go. Like I can't do that anymore, but that's still sort of how I approach when I skate because it's like the skates are early in the morning, and so it's like, okay, I'll get there, throw my gear on, and just go. So just things that are in my control that I should do better at, like just giving myself ample time, like realizing, I'm almost 40, and here in a couple of years, so it's not going to get any easier. So planning ahead, I think, will help more in that regard.
Yeah, I forget there's like a study that's done on like various sports to say how like injurious they are, and I think like bodybuilding is like very low on that list. Powerlifting I think is relatively low, and then like more of those like I guess team sports and more like contact sports are the ones that where injuries crop up a little bit more. And I can already picture like an ice hockey goalie who's like shoving his knees down to the ground to try and block everything, every puck possible. And I can see how that might put strain on areas that maybe shouldn't be going there.
Yeah, it's an unnatural position for sure. So, but just, I mean, if I spend 5 minutes doing something like dynamic before I get there, when I get there, it makes a world of difference.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of doing it. And I think now I'm starting to appreciate like that, giving myself like that extra 5-10 minutes is, it pays you back in the end. So.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely relate to that. And I think it's nice for the listeners to hear of someone who is so like competitive as a bodybuilder, as a powerlifter, but also like you, again, this is like taking if a new person coming to like bodybuilding might be like, oh, I have to go all in, guns blazing, because there's trade-offs if I try and do anything else that I enjoy. And it's like, oh, but even something like when you're even at like the level we're at, where we're doing decade, 2 decades, like you can still enjoy some of these other things and still make progress with what you're doing. And sure, that the trade-offs might be more as you've got deeper, because you just have less like room to add more things in, but you can still do it. It's just it becomes like where are your priorities and what's adherable to you and what's going to make you enjoy the process.
You got to pick your spots for sure. So you have limited resources as you can, I mean, we always do, but yeah, it's been a good off season though. Overall, it's been productive. So I'm excited. And the plan is to prep next year.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, that's the plan. I hopefully this knee and hip thing isn't a limiting factor there, but like I don't feel like I don't want to prep for anybody really other than like myself. Like I don't want to, like I don't really feel any pressure to prep. I mean, I in a sense I do. It's like you're a bodybuilding coach. People like to see that you can do it, but that's not the driving factor. Like that's so low on my list of motivating variables there. So if I'm not feeling like I can bring my best, I won't, but I still feel confident that I'll make it there.
You weren't
enjoy
tempted.
The process more than anything. And I think Berto's going to come back in 2024 too. So
is he?
I think so. And so we have actually, we have Jeff, Eric, and Brad all prepping right now. So I'm excited to, watch them this year, and then next year, hopefully be able to create a create more content on the prep side of things with Bert. So
sure.
Good.
You've actually 2017 when you last competed was with Alberto as well, wasn't it? Yeah. So a little bit of a rivalry.
He always gives me shit because he could have done WNBF Worlds that year. Okay. And I don't have my WNBF pro card. Like, I've never competed in the the amateur affiliate there. So I did like the KC IPE show. So I was a pro in IPE, and in hindsight, I don't know why I didn't do like a WNBF amateur show last time, but Berto, knew I had qualified for Worlds, and he had as well. So he joined me for that, which, I mean, it was a great show, but it wasn't WNBF Worlds. It was, we had Liam there from the UK.
Yeah,
that made it an international show. But yeah, it was basically like the KC lineup and then Liam. So yeah, I know he did very well at Worlds this year, and I think he's going to be contending for that lightweight title here soon.
Yeah,
he already is, but I'd like to be up there, and I plan to try to do the WNBF circuit next time, but obviously there's plenty of work to be done between now and getting to Worlds, like winning a pro card. And now with a bigger talent pool, that's not a given by any means. So that would be the first goal there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I recognize the name Liam, and I know who you mean because I remember watching you guys compete, and I saw him. I must have caught him somewhere, and similar to both you and Alberto, just completely shredded. Yeah, like he gets crazy lines.
He's got a ton of muscle too. He's got more muscle than either Berto or I. He's just dense. But I hope he comes back soon. I haven't really seen much from him. But yeah. He's from the UK.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
That's exciting, partly because I'm also considering I have planned to do next year as well. Whether or not I will, it's kind of similar to you. There's no pressure to have to do it. It's not like I have to compete because I'm a pro and I have to do that every 2 years or anything like that. It's just whether or not I'm improved enough, kind of similar to yourself.
I mean, it seems like you've had a pretty awesome off season so far.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was looking at some photos yesterday. Arms just keep getting bigger. So it's like the body part that just responds to anything for you, it seems like.
It's very frustrating. I just literally trained today, and I do 4 sets of direct bicep work a week. And after an upper body day today, I did 2 sets of like Bayesian curls. And I was like, I just didn't really need to do those. So I was just like, I could just do no bicep work and they're still going to grow. So it's good for the pull down. Yeah, it's good for the shirt muscles and like on the beach, but like I'm like, as a bodybuilder, I'm embarrassed that they're my strongest like muscle group. I want something like big quads, like big legs. That's like that's bodybuilder stuff. So
no, you'll be good, man. It's it's been I was talking to somebody the other day about this. Like it's been cool just since like 2017 in the fitness space, seeing people that were newer to competing and like how much progress that they've made past 5 years or so. So I'm excited. I hope you do, and that'd be fun to follow along with you too. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, if I can get to Worlds again and maybe see like that was an incredible experience. People are probably bored of me saying it, but being there, I felt like, I don't know, like that was natural bodybuilding for me. Just like in one weekend, it was the weekend of my life, quite literally. Like it was just such a great experience.
Yeah, so that was WNBF, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's it's an unbelievable show. Like the depth that's in that show is just ridiculous, especially on the pro level, and even on the amateur level. Like there's amateur lineups where any of them could be, pros, in the WNBF. They maybe
Yeah.
just haven't earned it yet, so it's, yeah, that whole federation, they're doing a lot of spreading, throughout the world. So it's just going to, I think, continue to get better.
You get all these athletes from like Spain, or I remember particularly Spain and Germany, and I'm just like, what the hell are you guys eating?
Yeah,
like, what's in your water?
All the Germans are just like, yeah, shredded and just have a shitload of muscle. So it's, yeah, there's something in the water
there. Brian, something I've been asking almost every guest who's come on, well, almost every guest really, because everyone who I bring on basically trains. With the new literature, I would say some of it's new, obviously some of it's been around for a while, and the kind of concept of stretch-mediated hypertrophy has been something people have thought of. Full range of motion training has always been kind of the way people have said this is probably the way to go, but it seems to be that like that lengthened range of motion seems to be particularly potent for hypertrophy. Has that literature, the discussion surrounding it, influenced your training at all? Because I think that's about, of everything that's come out over the years, the only thing that's influenced my training.
Yeah, it has for sure. I would say, especially, I mean, a lot of movements you get into lengthened positions anyway, like pressing. I'd say less so there, but a lot of like back work, I've noticed, and bicep work. And there's arguments. Some muscle groups aren't going to respond to stretch mediated hypertrophy. But the way I look at it is like, okay, if I'm neglecting a muscle length or a part of the range, that active range that I can get into, it's like there's, to my knowledge, there's nothing to say that those muscle groups grow better at shorter muscle lengths. So it's like, let's spend some time, hanging out in those more time hanging out in those lengthened positions, and especially like back work. I've noticed, it's like the opposite of chest work, in the sense that it's like peak forces are usually when you're in, or like, I guess, peak demands are usually closer to shortened positions, whereas in pressing it's more lengthened. So like that lengthened range is not getting a lot of resistance, and it's like a pull down. It's like you're not really getting into a stretch for your lat. And so one thing that, and I have to credit like Kaz, over at N1. I mean, I think he's kind of opened my eyes to some of the newer techniques and things to kind of explore there. I think some people kind of run with what he says and speak in more absolutes than, like, I know he does. Like I know he provides more context, and I think people sort of either overlook that or ignore it in some cases and say, like, these are, like, they start writing off exercises completely, and I don't think that's his goal at all. But some of the, like, the pulling movements, where you're kind of shifting into a hip, where you're kind of pulling more across, using a slightly more like neutral rib cage when I'm using lats. I think it's helped, and I can't definitively say it's just because of that, but I mean, anytime it's like you try something sort of novel, it's like you approach it with a lot of intent, and you're excited about it. So like back training is something like I mean, I would do it, but it was never like my favorite muscle group to train. But this off season, it has been one of my favorites. And I think that alone, like just creating that environment for like, okay, there's more gains to be had here. And, having belief in that, I think, goes a long way too. So, but I also think it's contributed, at least to some degree. And so, on paper, it makes sense why it may. I think it's like anything. You can take things to the extreme and, think like, okay, lengthened, spend time in length, or just write off like shortened positions entirely. And I think those have value too. Like I went down to watch Kaz and Pat,
oh yeah,
have their debate, and it was it was cool. One thing, Kaz had mentioned that I think a lot of people overlook, is like those shortened positions. Like they tend to be more like orthopedically friendly. It's spending time in those can be helpful. And, sort of like if you're at the bottom of a squat and your knees feel like they're going to explode, sort of taking, something like a reverse band can sort of blunt some of that discomfort at the bottom while still biasing the lengthened position. I think people think like the more load I can use in lengthened positions, the better. And I think that's kind of looking at things in a vacuum and sort of neglecting other potential ramifications that can have. So, but yeah, to answer in a roundabout way, to answer your question, yeah, it has influenced, the way I approach things to some degree, especially like with the back work, some arm work, like triceps, I feel like the long head of my triceps seems like it's responds pretty well. I think it would respond pretty well even if I didn't do like overhead movements where it's at a longer length. But even those, it's like I have to be a little bit careful because over time, like that, even if I'm lining up the angle of pull with my joint, like it can still kind of wear on my elbows a little bit. So it's just kind of picking your spots when it comes to dedicating your time to spending in more lengthened positions, like leg extensions. Like I've started doing like lying leg extensions, where I can actually lay back on the bench. But it's also one of those, like, the reason I do that is because there's like no force at the bottom of the machine that I have, because it's just like the plate loaded, like
right.
It's like probably the crappiest leg extension on earth, so it's like if I can at least put more of a stretch on the muscle, that could help. So but yeah, no, I think it's interesting. It's an area of research that I've been following, and I think a lot of us have, and it'll be interesting to see like more like longer term studies on some of these variations and how they compare in terms of like regional hypertrophy. So because we have some data, we have a good bit of data, but there's still questions that need to be answered there.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah. No, that's really cool to hear. And I know Milo's running his like full ROM versus partial ROM kind of groups for 12 weeks. So that'd be really interesting to see how that runs. And like, it still won't confirm everything, I doubt, but it's definitely interesting. And it kind of, when you like pull back to like what bodybuilders, I guess, did in the past. And I think about particularly on like rowing, me and Milo discussed this, like, when you see like bodybuilders rowing in the past, like how much momentum did they use to get it short? And it's like maybe because they kind of intuitively felt that there was something to that stretch point where they wanted to make that harder, make the short easier. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's actually, I should say the same with like all the information that came out over the last years about like biomechanics, particularly CASM and N1. To me, it was kind of a little bit like if it fits your macros. When I first started learning about that, I was a bit like, oh, really? Can I eat like, I don't know, whatever it is? Can I eat something different to my chicken and broccoli and rice? And then I tried bits and I was like, oh, I'm still getting great results. It's the same with this kind of, with some of the biomechanics and with the stuff Kassem's put out. I've been like dipping my toe in, trying bits. Same with long muscle lengths actually, and trying length and partials for a little bit, and just like incorporating it and seeing how it goes. And yeah, that's been great. I think a lot of the, I think you said it really well, where Kassem, I think he had a certain message that then kind of got lost as it got picked up. I've seen the only example I can think offhand with that is someone like with Mike Israetel and like MRV. I think some people heard that and they're like, oh, Mike's just saying train like at this maximum level all the time. And that wasn't the message, but people kind of hear what they want to hear and they take extremes. So I think it's starting to turn now for Kassem, where his message is starting to come through and the field is leveling a little bit. So yeah, I definitely like the pull around variations and things like this, especially for a blocky waist like mine. I'm like, I need this. Like, if I can get that, the lats poking out a bit more.
Yeah. And there's things that, you know, he's put out that like I don't care for personally. They like make sense like biomechanically, but like the press around, you know, I've had him, you know, even kind of help me with the technique, and it's just not my favorite. I just feel like I don't have that same stability as I would if I'm pulling unilaterally.
Same experience for me.
Yeah. So
I tried them for a bit.
Yeah. But another thing that I think a lot of value in some of the stuff that he's put out is like just things are just more orthopedically friendly if you pay more attention to how you're setting up, like in relation to the force, you know. You know, there's less lateral force at a joint, you know, if you have things lined up well. And at least for me, that seems to help, because as we know, my joints aren't the best.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it opened up some people's eyes to, like, I don't know, putting certain exercises on a pedestal. And actually there's some people, like you kind of mentioned, have gone too far, like all their session is just on the cable stack or something and they never include other stuff. But at least it made me be like, oh, actually maybe you don't need to idolize a squat or something, although I felt like I maybe knew that, but it kind of emphasized that a bit more, which has been nice. And something I wanted to, the topic I actually brought you on for, Brian, but I'm glad we talked about that, was in reference to a chat or a Q&A I think you did with Eric. And this relates to something that I give you major credit for in terms of this kind of principle of like meeting thresholds for hypertrophy. And once you've met these thresholds, like you're producing growth essentially. And I always think about that as like a relative intensity and a certain level of volume. And the kind of thought process, I think a lot of people have said is like logbooking is super important. You need to be logbooking so you know where you were last week and you can kind of progress from that this next week. But then you guys kind of discussing like, well, as long as you're in these thresholds, and you see a lot of people apply this, like you guys said, actually in the gym, equally you see people who don't apply it, but they're the ones not implying maybe intent or what have you. So yeah, I guess my question is, do you think as an advanced lifter, you could like not logbook and still see great progress? And then we can kind of dive into it.
I think you could. I mean, I think that's been shown just anecdotally. I mean, you see people in every gym that you know, even every, like the bodybuilding gym here in town that Berto and I go to, it's like they're maybe they're logging things kind of in their head, and I think everybody sort of does that, you know, to some extent anyway. But yeah, you can still make progress without logbooking, because like this sounds so obvious, but it's like your physiology isn't dependent on like what you write down, you know, and like what if you beat a specific number, it's in response to like an internal stress. And sometimes I think people will take a logbook and feel like they need to push past something. And like this, I don't want to go down, like talk too much about progressive overload there, but it's you know, that if your technique is changing, you know, if you're compensating by doing an additional rep, it's like you're just kind of BSing yourself that that's due to adaptation. So it's like I look at things like performance that's due to adaptation, like an increase in performance due to adaptation, than just progression due to trying harder, you know. And I think those are two very different things. But I think someone had commented on the YouTube video of that episode, and they said, you know, they like kind of like we were just talking about, they ran with it. They're like, so you guys are proponents of not using a logbook or something like that. It's like, no, that's not what we were saying. Like, I think as a whole, there's much more advantages of using a logbook than not. And I think from like an assessment perspective, you can do that. You know, like you can see like, okay, things are trending up over time here. You know, sort of organically based on the rate that I'm adapting, and looking at things like that versus like, okay, I'm logging that way. I know I have to beat that next time. And I think psychologically, I think that can be tough because we're never going to progress every single session for our entire career, you know? So, but it doesn't mean those sessions are wasted. You know, there's like a wide window that we can sort of fall within, like this adaptive range, you know, within a session. And, you know, ultimately it's like doing enough to tip the scales in favor of protein synthesis, you know, exceeding breakdown in the recovery period. And that's ultimately what we're after. And, you know, from the first set on, it's like you're at least increasing it, you know? So it's like you build up to a point, doing enough volume to sort of pass that threshold, and doing more can help, you know, to a point. But, you know, if you do more one week and then the next week you have to back off in terms of volume, like just because you did less volume doesn't mean you weren't still in that adaptive range necessarily. So, but I think a lot of this is, you know, probably an overgeneralization, but a lot of people that don't logbook are also maybe the types of people that train to failure frequently. You know, it's like they just go in, they blast a muscle group. It's like they in doing that though, and I think this is the point that I was trying to get across in that episode, in doing that, it's like they're getting out of the day what they can. It's like they're meeting their like stimulus threshold, assuming they're doing enough sets. And the nice thing about that is you don't really have to, when you're not rating RIR, like, okay, that, you know, I'm going to take this to a 2 RIR and compare it to my last performance to a 2 RIR. Like that, there can be some noise in that data, you know, depending on, you know, things like rest intervals, you know, your subjective ability to rate that, you know, from one day to the next could be different. But it's like by pushing to failure, it's like as those reps become available, like they're taking them automatically. You know, those reps become available. They still push to failure. It's like, oh wow, I remember like when we started this movement, I was doing 80s for 6, and now I'm doing them for 10. You know, and so they're accomplishing the objective still, without having to log. But I do think they could probably more efficiently get to that objective if they did log.
Yeah, I can see, and you made so many good points. The thought that I have is when I do log, it's kind of like you said, I tend to leave more reps in the reserve early within a mesocycle, and then each week I'm just kind of looking, like I beat a threshold and then I just look to beat it each week. And I can definitely see the temptation of kind of doing that, and then you again, like you said, you change technique just to beat last week, and it's like you don't actually, I think sometimes people have in their head they have to beat last week, otherwise like it's a failed session. And it's like, actually, even if you were like, so long as you're meeting thresholds, like you are still producing an adaptive response, whether or not it's the best thing you could be doing. So then I can see the appeal as someone like more advanced, just kind of go into the gym and just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna like take it to the house and not have to overthink it. I can actually see someone potentially doing that, and it might even lead them to have better technique and form because they're not focused on my ego of having to hit a certain number or thinking about my logbook.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's like when you when you don't have that message in the back of your mind, like I have to beat this. It's like whatever's there, I'll just empty the tank. And chances are, I mean, they probably have a general idea of what they had last time, you know, got last time. But I think like meticulous logbooking, like I take notes, you know, and I log my training, but there's some movements, like if I do like a rest pause set on something, it's like I don't even, like my logbook looks like I just track the first set, like the performance on the first set. And then like, I'll just put like some dashes for whatever sets I did after that, you know, because those are kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
And those can, you know, depend on seconds of rest. You know, it's like if I rest 30 versus 45 seconds, you know, that resting 45, I might get 2 more reps if you're doing something like that. So yeah, short rest, things like that. And, you know, rest pause, I feel like you just monitor that first set. That's going to give you the information that you need in terms of performance. And then the other thing that's kind of hard is if you start cheating on one movement, like say your primary movement within a session, you start, you know, there's some ego there and you want to beat it every single week. And each week you're just kind of, you're meeting the threshold, whether you realize it or not, but you're just kind of grinding yourself into the, you know, into paste at that point. Like usually if you do that, then that's going to affect your secondary movement. So it's like if your effort per set increases on a, you know, week to week basis, then your secondary movements are oftentimes going like there's going to be more noise in that data as well. Because you're going to be going into each week more fatigued than the last going into that first session. And if you're more fatigued, then it's going to be even harder to match the previous weeks, or you could match the reps, but it's going to be at a higher RIR. So I think even like for people that are just monitoring like their primary movements, you know, sort of diagnostic tools, I think that's another method that I think can work pretty well. Because the later in the session you get, the less reliable that data is in terms of informing you of like okay, thumbs up, you know, good things are taking place. But those primary movements over time, you know, should definitely be going up. But the key is over time, not week to week.
I think I've got this perspective on it where I think the people who maybe are never driven to Logbook potentially have better genetics and so can kind of get away with it because they adapt just nicely. Whereas I think a lot of us who maybe are driven to Logbook is because we need that level of detail to be able to make those adjustments and move forward with it. And the way I think about that is because similar to kind of what we were talking about before with my arms, biceps is one of those movements where I really don't care. Like I'm like, yeah. I'll go over here. As long as like they feel like they've got close to failure, they're going to grow. But I don't think I could take that same approach to other muscle groups.
Let me ask you this though: for biceps, are you logging everything like religiously there, or are you just kind of doing a couple sets, pushing it close to failure? Like, okay, I got a stimulus and moving on.
Most of the time, I'm just a creature of habit and I do log it. But okay. There will be times where I don't know if something, say the leg press was taken for my for my session, I would wait and I'm doing that. But if the preacher curl machine's taken and I had that program, I'd be like, oh, I'll just go to a different curl thing.
Yeah,
it's not such a big deal, and I won't log that. So but less meticulous, but still, I'm still quite anal with everything, to be honest.
Okay. But chances are, I guess I would argue, like if you're pushing close to failure on each one of those sets, and it's a muscle that's responding anyway, then the logging is not necessary.
Yeah.
You know? Especially when your arms grow as easily as you're like, you don't have to look at the numbers. You just look in the mirror. That's the goal, right? It's like, you want to be able, it's like, it's cool if data goes up, but you want it to be reflected on your physique. So whatever you're doing there, just keep doing it, even if it's like the bare minimum. You're doing for biceps.
I think you made a really nice point as well, actually, on like more compound lifts. I think particularly for legs, we know from the data that people are not as good at rating RIR. So even if they think maybe they're at like failure, if they're at like perceived failure there, that they might not be. And I know for me, for leg press was a good example where I don't have my data there to make sure that I'm pushing. Sometimes like I could see myself unconsciously sandbagging it when I don't intentionally mean to. So for me, having those objective numbers sometimes is like, I surprise myself being able to push there. Do you think, do you ever get that with some of your training where it's just like, especially, I don't know, heavy leg training where it's just like, this is just always going to be feeling hard?
Yeah, no, I think there's value in, I think there is value in having a number in the back of your mind that like you're pushing for. But you have to be reactionary and know like if form is breaking down, then like that's when I'll stop. But I mean, there's days where if you're more motivated one day, or, you just say you had some additional caffeine or a pre-workout or something, or listening to a song that you like you're going to get more output. Then the next week, maybe you don't do that, or you train first thing in the morning, and like you probably can't expect that to be the case. But I do think with like leg training, like leg press in particular, like that's one movement where it's probably one of the only movements where I can almost predictably add weight every week and match reps. Like I go in with the intent of like, okay, like some double progression scheme. But if I keep weight the same, I usually like go past the top of the rep range. Like, so and a lot of that is just the fact that the absolute power, the volume in terms of tonnage is so high. Like you're adding
microload.
25 pounds isn't that large of a relative increase compared to something else. So, but also, like you said, with legs, some of it just comes down to like, are you willing to go to that place to get that additional rep? And, I think 90% of people, if they had, somebody screaming in their face during a set, like they would, be able to get significantly more reps than maybe they would have otherwise. And I think it's interesting too, like I believe like the voluntary activation of quads is a bit lower than some muscle groups because it's such a big muscle. So like I think that is one muscle group that could benefit from pushing it a little bit closer. Just so you can tap into as much of those, higher threshold fibers as you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when I think about training quads, that is the one muscle group I feel like I have to be extra switched on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just eat, like I do straight leg deadlifts, but I have to be switched on for that, not the same way as even for the quads, where I'm just, because hamstrings, they're going to get kind of wrecked from a hip hinge as long as you're in a proximity to failure. Like, but yeah, if you're not switched on, I do find that if for quads, like I can't actually take them close to failure if I'm in another place or in like my head somewhere else. I mean, that's for a lot of movements, but particularly for quad training. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think another thing that people will do on things like leg press to try to get that extra rep, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just being able to recognize when you're doing this, is just taking more time between reps. It's like, okay, I got 10 reps last week. It's like you get to the top, you take 3 breaths. And I mean, those are like clusters at that point, so yeah, your stimulus is going to be higher if you push for that extra rep, but is it due to adaptation? Marginally, maybe, like for a full additional rep, if you're having to take, basically a mini rest in between each rep. So I think from a diagnostic perspective, like if the message is like the logbook is good for, assessing like actual like organic progress rather than just load progression, then keeping things is, apples to apples is pretty important there.
Yeah, completely. I see that kind of standardization. I was terrible for it with back squats. Like I just needed like to take breaks up at the top, and just found I was extending the set via just adding these breathers up at the top. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, it's just, I need to standardize this. If I take one breather, it's one breather for the entire set or what have you. So yeah, with leg press, I can definitely see like you can stop at the top, kind of let that like lactate dissipate, and you can get in there another few reps, and that's fine, like you said, but you need to kind of know you're doing it, otherwise you can kind of be faking progress that way.
Yeah, and I guess if you're somebody that consistently does it, then you maybe are comparing apples to apples in some ways. But I do think like that if there's one big advantage of the groups that are, okay, I need to beat these numbers, I need to beat these numbers at all costs, like that'll teach you very quickly how to train hard. Like it'll self-correct for that. Like and I think a lot of people, that go into the gym, especially early in their training careers, have that mentality. It's like, I need to beat these numbers in order to progress. And while that's not necessarily true, at least, on that time scale, like if you're doing that on a session to session basis, it's like your ability to gauge failure is going to improve significantly. And so I think it's useful from like a calibration standpoint of like knowing like what failure truly feels like. Whereas if you're leaving reps in the tank, um, you know, early on in your training career, like there's certainly situations where that would be advisable. Plenty of situations, but um, I do think there's something to be said for people that started their careers with that mentality because they ended up, yeah, they know what hard work feels like, and I think that's important, especially for things like leg training.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Out of interest, Brian, for your own training, do you have like any objectives or goals in terms of timescales for where you want to see like a objective PR for a movement? Do you have that in mind, or do you just kind of let it completely just come to you?
I probably train 1 to 2 RIR on most sets, I would say. But it's exercises where I know like the target muscle is going to be the limiting factor. Like on a squat, that might not be the case. Like if I'm starting to compensate my hips, shooting back, that's like I sort of explain it like I look at RIR on a muscle group basis in some ways. It's like if you're squatting, like Jared Feather, meant to message him earlier. He posted a really good video as earlier today or yesterday about like people, if they're compensating in a movement, it's like they're just avoiding the hard, painful part. And I think that is there's a lot of truth to that in many cases, but there's also situations where it's like you on a squat, for example, it's like your quads, they can no longer meet the demand while maintaining technique. And so there's going to be a compensatory effect there, where, you're decreasing the moment arm that they're working against by hips coming back more. But I guess the reason I mention that is because if I'm training pretty close to failure, usually it's on those movements where I know like that muscle group is the limiting factor, so in that regard, like I since I'm pushing pretty close to failure, like those gains do come sort of organically. Like I log it and I think like, okay, like sometimes I ask myself before I train, like, okay, I slept well. Like there's no reason performance, like I didn't feel like shit heading into this session. Like I should be able to at least match this, and I think, there's times where performance is going to be down, and in those cases, I don't try to push it. But on the days where I know I'm well recovered, I do tend to try to beat the logbook. But in terms of time scale, I mean, I don't really give myself goals for like accessory movements, simply because like you have to be doing something long enough to really know what to expect in terms of rate of progression within that movement. And like some of the variations that I'm doing right now, like I've only been doing for 8 weeks or so, and so and like if I circle back to them, then it's kind of building back up. But things on like a squat, I know, like in the context of powerlifting, like a 6-week block where maybe even if it's like a volume block, I can usually put on 5 kilos to like an estimated max pretty predictably there, or more. And sometimes it depends on where I'm coming from with training, but that's like your starting estimated max of the block, not like your PR necessarily. But heavier movements are going to be, the time frame for seeing new weight that you're touching in those is just going to be shorter inevitably, just by the nature of it being a heavier load and a smaller increase. So things like isolation movements, I really just sort of push for additional reps. And I think that's one thing Eric and I discussed on that too, is, if you're given a rep range and you say you're doing like a double progression where, once you hit the top of the rep range, you increase weight. But let's say your rep range is like 12 to 15 and it's a lateral raise. But let's say you're a beginner and you're, doing 10 or 15 pounds, then like jumping up in weight, if you get to 15 reps, it's like, then you're going to go to like 6, so it's in those cases, you kind of have to recognize where the strength of, either yourself or your athlete is. And sometimes it's just extending the top end of that rep range so they can build more runway to kind of work with. That way they can still kind of fall. But the rep ranges they're just kind of an attempt to kind of get you in a similar loading zone. I mean, you've talked about rep ranges a lot on your podcast, and I think just different phases where you're in a similar realm. Like the difference between a set of 8 versus a set of 10 is probably pretty minimal on a physiological level, at least in terms of, fatigue. But, a set of 4 versus a set of 15, like that's going to feel significantly different. So, I try to program in a way where it's like each set is, for a movement, we're trying to kind of keep it clustered in the same neighborhood of stimulus.
That makes a lot of sense in terms of like, also in terms of the block length. You mentioned like every 6 weeks being able to like hit some new numbers there, and that's kind of similar to where I end up landing up. I try to like hit like a mini PR, whether that be like small additional load, normally that's on the big compound lifts, or like 1 rep extra on like a lateral raise or something like that every block. If I can do that like every 6 weeks or so, every mesocycle, that'd be great. That's like what I'm kind of aiming for, so that over time that's kind of adding up. But oftentimes we're repeating a lot of performance there. But I mean, like we've kind of mentioned with meeting those thresholds, that's like once you become intermediate going on advanced, majority of the time you're sticking with the same sort of like loads and weights and things. And I mean, you could argue there's like minute adaptations going on where your form's a little bit better, like even if you're performing the same, and that could happen. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense, Brian. And especially for like those isolation movements where, you go up from like you said, a 10-pound weight to a 15-pound weight, like you hugely increase the load. 5 pounds on that is very different to 5 pounds on a leg press. So yeah, people can't be matching reps on that. And then their form is definitely going to go out the window if they try to. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, Brian. It's been great chatting to you. And if people want to learn more about you, I mean, it sounds like you're going to be vlogging your prep. I don't know where you might be putting
I'm not vlogging anything, Steve.
You're going to be Instagramming.
I'm not that guy. No, maybe video, some YouTube videos, but go on. You won't see me filming myself in my car when I'm walking with my dog.
Eating out of your Tupperware in a car or something.
Hear me chew my food. I'm excited for next year, and the rest of this year. First and foremost, just getting what I can out of the rest of this off season, and then get it going next year. So yeah, it'd probably be about a year from now. If things go to plan, I'd be in prep.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely get you back on to have a bit of a chat about that and see how that's all going. And I'll link Brian's Instagram below, and obviously 3DMJ too, so you can check that out. And they have Brian's on their podcast as well. So if you like hearing Brian's voice, you'll hear it more over there. And again, thank you, Brian, for coming on. Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.